Good morning, members, and welcome to the. We've got some feedback there. I think it's from that Davina. We're just trying to sort out the acoustics. Hold on. Everything's off. Sorry. Why do we need this on? Shall I just pause them for a moment? Again, welcome everyone to today's GLA Oversight Committee, and we have got some members in person and some attending remotely. Can I remind people to turn their mobile phones off or put them on silent, and so that we and don't put them near the microphones as well. Let's go for any apologies for absence. Have we received any apologies, please?
There's no apologies for absence have been received, Chair.
And we've got 3 members attending remotely. Assembly Member Duval, Onka Sahota and Marina Ahmed. So welcome. Let's look at declarations of interest. Can we note the list of offices held by Assembly members, and do members have any other disclosable pecuniary interest in any items on the agenda? No? Noted. Thank you very much. Item 3, minutes. Can we confirm the minutes of the meeting of the Oversight Committee held on the 7th of December to be signed by me as a correct record? Thank you very much. Summary list of actions. Can we note the completed, closed and ongoing actions from previous meetings of the Oversight Committee? Noted. Thank you very much. Action taken under delegated authority. Can we note the recent action taken by myself as chair under delegated authority, namely to note in consultation with the deputy chairman and party group lead members the chief officer's proposed minor restructure of the Assembly communications team? Thank you very much. Let's move to our first item, which is the GLA Elections 2024 consideration of counting arrangements. We've got Mary Hartley here, and I think you've got 2 officers with you who I'm not sure, I've not met them before, so perhaps you could introduce yourselves and your roles and then perhaps talk us through this paper, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I am here, of course, in my capacity as Greater London Returning Officer this morning for this paper. Both Lee and AJ have been core members of my team for 2021 elections and will remain so for 2024. So I'm just going to ask them to introduce themselves as you have requested. So Lee.
Yeah, good morning. My name's Lee Goddard. I'm the Senior Elections Project Manager for London Elects.
Hi, my name's AJ Patel. I'm Senior Project Manager on the eCount for London Elects.
So to briefly introduce this paper, although we've only just had a set of GLA elections, the next ones, of course, are coming up in May 2024, which is getting close to being only 2 years away. As the Greater London Returning Officer, I now need to put some serious consideration, particularly to how we are going to count the ballots in 2024. And of course, that is for 3 elections: election to London Mayor, election to Assembly constituency seats, and election to Assembly London-wide seats. The GLA elections have been counted electronically since the beginning. I think there's previously been some sort of stock takes whether we should continue to count electronically or move to a manual count. But there are 2 specific reasons why I am putting serious consideration to that choice now. The first is the expected removal of the second preference vote for mayor. The legislation to bring that into effect is going through at the moment, and we expect that to be in place well before the 2024 elections. And of course, that simplifies the counting process substantially. The second consideration is the potential coincidence of a general election with the GLA elections. Now, that is only a potential coincidence, but the potential for it has an impact as well on our thinking about how we count 2024. As GLRO, I really need to make a decision on this by the end of March, partly because it takes 2 years to plan for an election of this scale, and partly because our contract with the e-count provider in 2021 gives us an option to have them work with us again in 2024, but we do need to exercise that option by the end of March, again for similar reasons, just because of the lead times involved in planning and delivering this election. So I'm coming to the committee this morning really to just share my thinking, to share some of the work we're already doing with colleagues across the boroughs, of course on whom we work very closely on delivering the GLA election, and just to hear your thoughts and reflections on the choice before us. But as I say, I need to make that choice by the end of March. I'll leave it there in terms of introduction.
Lovely, thank you very much. And I also had circulated to committee members, Andrew Boff had done a paper on this, the chair, and he asked for that to be sent round so people are aware of his work on this. Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you. Can you tell me why there's no costings available to any of us?
So, so we know roughly what the cost of an e-count would be in 2024, although we don't know that fully because, of course, we would need to have proper negotiations with the supplier.
Okay, which is?
Well, we expect that to be in the region of £30 million. 2021 cost us 38, but of course we had extraordinary costs associated with that. What we don't know yet is what a manual count would cost, but those costs are being worked up as part of the final decision. On the face of it, it will cost less than an electronic count for reasons that if we want to go into, AJ can explain. But of course I won't, by the time I'm making the final decision, Assembly Member Hall, of course we will have full costings for a manual count in front of us.
Yes, but it can really influence our thoughts back to you. I mean, what's the rough idea of a manual count?
Well, a manual count would remove the need for all the development of the e-count software and all the hire of the e-count equipment. So I'm going to hand to So we have an estimate for that, which AJ will share.
Well, I think we all get that, but we don't know what we're comparing it to even vaguely. So
in terms of what we would save the costings of having the e-count supplier, the venue rentals, and then specifically for the e-count, we're forced to go with these 3 large, highly resilient venues,
yes,
which have a premium in terms of cost. So we would be able to save on those items also. And then with regards to the ballots, we have to procure specific ballots of a specific quality so they can be scanned accurately. We would have more flexibility with the ballots we'd be able to procure in under a manual count process. So of that 9 million that we spent for the contractor, very little of that would be required. We would have additional costs on the other side with regards to the venues we would need for a manual count and the staffing, but those would be significantly less because, well, the venues would need to be resilient and The staffing we would need more people, but we wouldn't need the same level of technical expertise for the manual count versus the electronic counts.
So
Yes,
we're expecting a manual count to be the order of £7 to £8 million cost in the order of £7 to £8 million less than an electronic count. But that, we do need to work that through in more detail. But that's the order of difference that we're working on at the moment.
Right. And okay, we've got nothing in front of us. You're saying that, but there's no fixed figures there. I'm wondering why this paper didn't come next month, when you might at least have worked some of these figures out.
I brought it now because I'm trying to be helpful. I'm trying to share
It's
the
not
thinking.
helpful.
Well, so I'm sorry, Assembly Member Hall. I was trying to be helpful by sharing the thinking as it is presenting itself. My problem is I'm going to have to make the final decision by the end of March.
Yes.
I'm busy talking to borough colleagues, agents and others about the choice ahead of us. It seemed to me important that I should come to Oversight Committee sooner rather than later.
Right, okay, well, we can agree to disagree on that because it's helpful to have a paper where we've got all the information we need to sit and make decisions. And with the greatest respect, we do understand what won't have to be done. We're all politicians. We've been enough times in these meetings. Can I ask you, Mary, how many staff are actually working on elections in your departments? What's the staffing?
Well, the staffing differs compared to the point we're at in the elections, but right now I have Lee and AJ who are working with me to prepare for 2024. I'm giving some of my time to that, and Alex Conway, who isn't here today because he's on jury service, is operating as the deputy returning officer as well. But together, Alex and I are just doing it as part of the time that we spend working on our other jobs too.
Yeah.
That staffing will, of course, begin to ramp up as we get closer. But at the moment, that's the staffing.
So the two gentlemen that are with you and the gentleman that's on are not departments underneath?
No, I think at the moment it's just us.
Okay, no.
Yep.
Okay, that's fine. I'll leave it for other members to ask other questions.
I've got Assembly Member Russell and then Assembly Member Fortune and Assembly Member Duval. I've seen you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to note that the Assembly position on the removal of the second preference in the mayor vote has not been reflected in the paper that was circulated. That was a motion that was agreed back in November, so just before Christmas. And I think the agreed position of the Assembly, it would be good if that had been reflected in the paper. My question is, if we're looking at a manual count, are you costing on the basis of a COVID situation and also a non-COVID situation? It is perfectly possible in that in the election period that we will be dealing with another variant of the pandemic. So is that factored into your costings for a manual count? Because that has implications in terms of size of rooms and the and staff safety.
Yeah, I will ask Lee to answer that. Just before Lee does, just on the absence of any reference to the Assembly's position on the second preference vote in this paper, we are coming to you, of course, purely as administrators of the election. So, that's the scope of this paper.
Yeah, that is understood, but it hasn't yet been agreed that it's kind of the paper kind of presents it almost as a done deal that we're losing the second preference, and that's not yet a final position. And I think that's what wasn't, that wasn't necessarily reflected.
Okay, So Lee, costs for COVID.
Yes, so we're looking at both options really for a COVID election and a non-COVID election, and that will form part of the final costings when we get there very soon.
And just one more question, which is if you're dealing with the general election on the same day as the London election, the general election, it is likely, will be working on different boundaries and from the constituency boundaries that we have for the London election. And how far is that being factored in terms of, particularly if you're talking about, I mean, there may be advantages to a manual count with that, in that you can do all the checking, potentially even at the polling stations, the verification, but because you're going to have people, you're going to have boxes going in the different directions because of the different elections, but yeah, the boundaries are different for the two elections.
I mean, you are right. There are several further complications of the combination. So, Lee, do you want to talk to some of that?
Yeah, indeed. That's a very good point. Thank you. And that's part of what we're looking at, working with the boroughs now about how that would work with, as Mary's indicated, all the other complications and detail that needs to be worked through. So it is part of the work programme.
Okay, Assemblymember Fortune.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, it was extending that logistical theme that Assemblymember Russell was looking at. First, if you could build on any feedback you've had from boroughs, initial feedback, that would be quite interesting, especially around staffing. I know that there are some real pressures, or there were some real pressures last time around staffing, especially if we factor in the possibility of a general election count, whatever happens with voter ID, etc., etc. I think there's going to be some complexities there. If we do go to a borough-by-borough count process, would the declarations be in the individual boroughs? I'm thinking for constituency members running around trying to be in two places. Maybe that's a bit selfish. And then finally, would the final decision sit with you, Mary?
Thanks. Thank you, Assemblymembers Fortune. So again, I'm going to turn to Lee because this is exactly all the conversations we're having with boroughs at the moment. I think it's probably fair to say that in election administration terms, a combined GLA election and a general election is probably, as administrators, the worst possible nightmare. And and I think candidates understand that too. In terms of where the boroughs are, I mean, I think the honest answer to that, there is a spectrum of views in the boroughs. And, we're talking to the election administrator community, so people that used to be Lee's peers when Lee was working in local government, and, of course, the returning officers, people who were my peers when I was working in local government. And there's a spectrum from, there are some who think, no, absolutely, we should stay with an E-count. There are some that think we should have been counting manually for years, and there are people in the middle, and there's a lot of detail to be sorted through. There are models, of course, for doing pan-London manual counts. We've had those in the former elections to the European Parliament. We've had that in referendums as well that have been managed London-wide. So there are sort of some models for that. When it comes down to the final decision, that is mine as the GLRO. But of course, it is my absolute intention to arrive at a point where those people I will be working with to deliver this election are sufficiently in agreement with the decision. That's absolutely what we're working towards through the London Election Management Board. But on a bit of the detail, Lee.
I think Mary's answered most of the question, but just to say again, we are working with various working groups to ensure that all the possibilities, feasibilities of an e-count v manual count are explored and working through, as I say, with key stakeholders. We will come to an informed decision within the next 4 to 6 weeks.
Thanks. So just to pick up on the thinking at the moment around declarations, what is it, 33 boroughs, 14 constituencies, how would that work?
Yeah, for the constituency results, yes, they would be declared at local level, but then very much for the London-wide Assembly and the mayoral elections, that they would be declared centrally via Mary as per the normal process.
So what I mean is, if you take, God's chosen land of Bexley and Bromley, there's a declaration in Bexley to say this is half the result. Then there's a declaration in Bromley to say this is the other half of the result. And then where's the final declaration done, just around those constituency members?
So the final declaration will be the responsibility of the constituency returning officer. So it will be the lead borough where that result is declared.
Let them fight out which one's the lead borough. I'm not getting involved in that. Thank you, Chair.
Just to be clear, if I may, Chair, so the lead borough is laid down in law, Assembly Member? Yeah, so I think it's, in the case of Bexley and Bromley, it's Bromley. But that is laid down in law, so there's no fighting over it.
And don't forget, some constituencies have 3 boroughs plus even the City of London, so it's lots of complexity here. I've got Assembly Member Duval.
Thank you, Chair. The problem with this debate, and look, I appreciate the heads up from Mary about the issue, but really, are you trying to get a view from us about some of these issues, an informed view about some of the complexities of the decisions that you're about to make? Because this is, for me personally, a very important issue. It's about our democracy. It's about how democracy is carried out and how we avoid problems and debates. And I'm not convinced that actually, if you've got a decision to make in 4 to 6 weeks, whether you really give a toss about what our views are, and whether we're there to to do this. And I think there are people around this table and there are people in other places that could give you some formal views around this. So is it your intention in the 4 to 6 weeks before you take your decision to bring back that other paper with the pros and cons of the various choices? Because I'm not convinced by a manual count. I can see some of the issues for it. But one thing you haven't talked about is the timing of that, when that announcement of that debate is, because part of the democratic process, people vote and then they want a result. And I know we have an instant reaction in our society on many things, and we all want the answer very quickly. But it seems to me on a manual count, we could be running into considerable delays before we would indicate who the new mayor or who would be the mayor of London, or even in some constituencies, if we run into difficulties. It's always complex, our elections. It's always complex when it's being run with other elections. Fingers crossed, we hope our election doesn't combine with a general election, because it would be an administrative nightmare. So I just want some views back on that. And in real time, or are people, because it does, call me cynical or not, or are people feeding you issues behind closed doors and saying, well, actually, this is what we really think about it? Because I want the Assembly to be able to do that. I prefer it transparent. I prefer a formal report that tells me the pros and cons, and we can give an indication of which way we would review. I understand it's your decision. But I do think that decision should be informed by as many people as possible. It doesn't appear to be the case at the moment.
Okay, thank you. So shall we talk about timing first, and then I'll come back and address some of the other points that Assembly Member Duval has put to me. Of course, the received wisdom in past years has been that getting a result from a manual count will take an extremely long time, potentially days. It's the expected removal of the second preference vote for mayor that changes that quite considerably. So Lee will talk about that. I'll then ask Lee to talk about the impact of a combined general because, of course, as everybody round this table knows, the general election would be the primary election, and any counting and declaration of the GLA election would be delayed until all the parliamentary election work was finished in London. So there's two quite different scenarios in terms of timing. So Lee, if you want to talk on timing, and then I'll come back to some of the other points.
Yeah, at the moment we're working through various flow charts with borough colleagues on timings, looking at all the different scenarios, GLA standalone election, GLA parliamentary combined election. I could give an example of some of the thinking perhaps on a GLA standalone election. That you would have the close of polls at 10 o'clock on the Thursday. You would do the verification of all three contests overnight on the Thursday into the Friday morning. Friday daytime, you would count two of the contests, with a third contest counted on the Saturday, for example. With the parliamentary election, Mary's quite right, of course, the parliamentary election is the primary election. That's the one that would be counted first, and then you'd follow on with the GLA elections, which would suggest that you'd be counting possibly into the Sunday. And to go back to some of the points raised, with the boroughs about, the staffing resources and so forth, able to do that. But I think the important thing to notice at the moment is that we are kicking around lots of different scenarios, flow charts for the boroughs before we come back with some reasoned final charts.
But it does bring the timing on a manual count forward from all the previous thinking. On the other points from Assembly Member Duval, I think, why am I here? Well, so it is ultimately my decision, but, as we all know, there are hundreds of people involved across London. In fact, ultimately, probably a few thousand people involved across London delivering these elections when we get to them, on who I rely and I want to talk to. So we're doing that talking very thoroughly with boroughs through Lee's engagement with the administrators, through the engagement of the London Elections Management Board, and also through the Chief Execs Committee. So I'm feeling confident, Assembly Member Duval, that we are hearing what borough administrators and returning officers think. I am here in part to hear of any immediate views you have on this paper and this choice. I can quite understand why some of you might also want to say, actually, we need to know more. We have asked, we've gone out to sort of key agents that we normally work with, to ask their views. They just have this paper. I'm happy to come and talk or hear from individual assembly members or groups of assembly members. I'm just trying to do my best to gather views and to make sure that we three haven't missed anything obvious. I'm happy to come back with a more detailed paper ultimately on the pros and cons, on where I think I'm going to jump. We can do that. We can do that in March. That will be fine. What I didn't want to do is I guess I was also reflecting that this committee takes an interest in the GLA elections. You will be expecting me to come to you in summer 2024 with a report on how the elections have done and how we collectively have done. What I didn't want is to be making it known end of March, early April, that actually we're going to count this way in 2024, and you all to say to me, well, goodness, where did that come from, Mary, and why didn't you talk to us? So, but I'm absolutely up for taking the responsibility, that is mine, to make the final call. But I am happy to talk to people in public or in private about people's thoughts. There will be more opportunity to engage in some of the detail as well later, but this is the big decision coming up: electronic as ever, or a switch to manual. And we do say in the paper, don't necessarily see a switch to manual for 24, meaning that would be then what's done forever after. It's the coincidence of the general in 2024 that makes this consideration a little different for 2024 as well.
Yeah, can I just come very quickly in? Just two issues, right? Whether there's a general election in 2024 is something that we will never know. It seems to be at the end of that election choice that government may have to decide to go that. And it's very unusual that any government would go right to the end in terms of moving that election. So there's a chance there we could be taking a decision that may be about whether the general election and our elections on the same day when it won't happen, where probability is highly unlikely. It could happen, but highly unlikely. Secondly, the issue is for me about manual voting is the second preference. You know, will we have, when you come to take a decision in March, the views from government that they're prepared with a legislation timetable to say that they've indicated they want to remove the second preference, but they're actually going to do it and commit parliamentary time to do that. Have we got that in a definitive way? What do you think the chances are by March to do it? Because it seems to me that's pretty important about some of the decisions that you're about to take on behalf of Londoners in terms of the democratic process. Look, Mary, I have a great deal of sympathy in terms of the decisions that you're having to work through and on that. And it seems to me that the other party who needs to be involved in this conversation is government. And you know, I'm really grateful for the work that you and the London boroughs are doing on behalf of our democracy of trying to work through these difficult issues. But unless government comes to the table as well and gives that indication about the second preference and the timetable of that, we could be making decisions that have an incredible impact on our democracy and the way things are done around on it and our voting processes. I know it's not a perfect world, but have you got an indication about the government and the second preferences and the timing of that?
Thank you. And of course, you're right, that decision lies at the heart of this. So we're in regular contact with elections teams in government, again, on the administrative side. Alex leads on that specifically. But as we say in paragraph 3.3 of the paper, it is our absolute understanding at the moment that the election bill that contains this piece is expected to receive royal assent in May this year. So the amendments are currently before Parliament. As I said, as I submitted this paper in its final form to the committee, we had checked with our contact in the Cabinet Office, and he confirmed that is absolutely the expectation. But we will be watching that very, very carefully. And you know, if in March it does indeed to appear to be still on track for receiving royal assent in May, then we may be able to hold off our final decision until we're absolutely sure it has received royal assent as expected. But you know, right, and that's what we've been grappling with, Assembly Member Duval. Until that is, as Assembly Member Russell said, you know, it's not law yet. And were it not to become law, that puts us in a different place altogether. On the coincidence of the general election, you know, this is another thing that we talk about a lot. I think everybody in this room will have a view on when the next general election might be. As we all know, the coincidence with ours does make things incredibly complex. I fear I'm in one of those situations where whichever decision I take, however well informed I am at the moment I take it, may in hindsight prove to be the wrong decision. My problem is I need to take it with a good, 2 years to go, because we can't switch horses with a year to go. It will be too late.
Okay, thank you for that. Assemblymember McCartney, you've indicated.
Yes, Mary, you said earlier that you have an option with the accounting company to run the 2024 elections. That option runs out, has to be exercised in March. Have you had discussions about extending that option a further 2 months? It would seem it would be in their commercial interests to do that, given the paper that we've got before us. The answer is yes, but AJ is our lead with CGI, so he'll say a few words on that.
We've had preliminary discussions with them about the opportunity to extend that time frame, but at the same time, they have resource constraints in terms of mobilization, and they need to be able to assign certain staff to different projects. So there will be like a hard deadline, which won't be very far from that point in which we'll need to make that decision.
But they served us extremely well in 2021. That's been a sort of a theme as we've talked to the boroughs. The e-count worked very well in 2021. We have a very good working relationship with them, and I am confident that they will be flexible as far as they possibly can be. Thank you. I think, Chair, that perhaps should be one of our recommendation from today on our part, that those discussions continue, because it would seem to me for them to make commercial sense, accepting they're needing to plan, but a 10 to 12 week period might not be insurmountable.
Yeah, I was thinking exactly the same thing as we're discussing this, that actually it's chicken and egg, isn't it? You need the legislation in place, because if you make the decision to go on a manual count and suddenly the legislation doesn't go through, you've suddenly got a manual count with a more complicated voting system in place. I would have thought the e-counting company surely would allow a few weeks so that there's certainty. Because from what you've told us, though we would like more detail, if the costs are a lot less in terms of counting manually, then that's an obvious decision given our budget constraints. So I think we would like you to come back in March with that greater detail, if you can, with the numbers, what the boroughs are saying, and also an update on the legislation and where you are with the e-counting company, just so that we can then hopefully make a recommendation to you on our thoughts on it. And I should just say that the Election Review Working Group, I believe, will have their report out next week, and it's a subcommittee of our committee, but they've been dealing with that, which may have some insights for you as well that you may want to take on board. Are there any other comments from members? Okay, so can we note the work in progress, and with the information we'd like to come back in March. Thank you very much, and thank you, Lee and AJ, for your work on this with Mary. Nice to meet you. Let's move on to our next item, which is item 7, the State of London debate. I believe, we have Emma Strain, Assistant Director of External Relations, who is joining us remotely today, who is going to introduce the paper briefly.
Thanks very much, Assemblymember Bridges, Chair. Just want to check you can all hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Super, thank you. So the paper sets out the intentions for the State of London debate for 2022. We are planning to plan this as a hybrid event, so while it be based at the O2, at the Indigo O2, we would also enable an audience to attend digitally. That gives us better ability to engage with Londoners, but also gives us the resilience should we be in a difficult situation with regard to COVID. We've used the venue at the Indigo O2 for a number of years, and it works very well. This is an event which involves the mayor, and as if he chooses to bring deputy mayors along with him, we usually have an independent chair, and we run a process with the commercial media organisations in London to select a partner for the event, which usually enables the event to be broadcast across London's media as well. I don't think I need to say any more than that. If there's any questions, I'm very happy to take them.
Assemblymember Fortune.
Thank you very much, Chair. Firstly, can I just start again by praising the fantastic security staff at the first People's Question time I attended. They were absolutely brilliant, squashing some of the disruption right at the beginning, so thanks again to them. But it's on the security point I just wanted to look at. If you go to the paper, paragraph 4.13, it's the second bullet point that talks...
Speak into your microphone.
Sorry. It's the second bullet point on paragraph 4.13 that talks about people who are previously known to have caused issues. There'll be a right of non-admittance. I just wondered, how does somebody end up on that list? Who decides who's on that list? And how does somebody go about challenging when they're on that list?
I think it's a very good question, and one that we should work through. Previously, that list has been incredibly short. I wouldn't imagine we would ever want it to be a long list, because of course this is really important that the public have access to these events. I think it's one that I should take away and come back to you on, because I think that is the challenge, is that how do you ensure that people have the right to attend these events? And even if a member of the public had got quite heated and concerned at a previous event, doesn't necessarily mean they would do so in future. But we do need to balance that with the safety of all of the attendees as well. So it's a tricky one, I think, and one of which I think we would take the advice of the local police when we get closer to the event. So the security team at the GLA, as you know, does a really good job. They work very closely with the local borough police, whether it's a PQT or a State of London debate. I think we would also take their advice on that as well. But I'm very happy to come back on that one. I think it's an item perhaps I should come back privately on, because I think it's that ensuring security probably means that we shouldn't advertise the detail of this publicly.
Thanks, Emma. That's reassuring. But I mean, I would like to be confident that it's an issue of safety as opposed to awkwardness. So, thank you.
Yes, of course.
Assemblymember McCartney.
Yes, Emma, my question is about whether we're putting any restrictions on the vaccine status or negative test to attend in person. We obviously don't know what the COVID situation is going to be like in June. I'm sort of deferring to my colleague, Dr. Sahota here, but those booster jabs may well have waned by then. Who knows where we are? I understand for PQT, we did say that was a requirement, but I'm not sure checks were carried out. Can you just tell me what your thinking is behind that?
Yeah, and I think again it's one where we would need to consider the situation nearer the time. And as we plan this event, we work really closely with the GLA's health team, and we take advice from them and public health colleagues as to what we should do in terms of the event and ensuring COVID safety, both for those attending the event as the audience and of course for members. So I think it's one that we do need to carefully consider. I don't think I can see into the future to work out what the situation will be like then, but I certainly can give assurance that we would look at it, and I'm very happy to come back to and confirm to members before the event, for example, for PQT or for State of London debate, what the thinking is in advance of sort of rocking up at the door, so to speak.
Assemblymember Best.
Thanks, Chair. Morning, Emma. Just wondered, you said then that obviously the deputy mayors, and they've come previously, that's if the mayor chooses to, and I learnt today from Assemblymember Pigeon that assembly members used to come as well. So how does this guest list get formed really? Is that just at the discretion of the mayor? Is there any way in which we can input into that? Because I think who's at there, it seems, to be thinking maybe some deputy mayors will come, maybe they might not. It seems quite inconclusive, and to make sure it's a good debate and there's something constructive comes out of it, I'd like to have more awareness of how we select that guest list and make sure the right people are there.
Yeah, in the State of London debate, the requirement in law is that is an event that the mayor owns, and with both State of London debate and PQT, the ultimate decisions on the formation of the event does sit with the mayor. Of course, we do consult with members. To my memory, historically, it's either been the mayor at the State of London debate only, or the current mayor has brought deputy mayors. But I think going back well before my time into the early days of the mayoralty, where I know a number of members will tell me what the answer is here, State of London debate was a much bigger conference held, I think, at the QE2 Centre with a whole bunch of different kinds of spin-off events and those kinds of things. Now, we haven't proposed that for this year, and that kind of event would take a lot of planning, but if it's something that we want to pick up on, then I'd be very happy to have some discussions about how we might do one of those wider events in future.
Thanks. I'd certainly like to do a bigger delve into what is the best way in which to do it, because I feel like perhaps not we're skating across that, or I've missed the opportunity to look more in depth about what we would recommend as the best event. And I would certainly think, if I was looking at the state of London, I'd certainly want to hear perhaps the group leads of other groups, as opposed to just one view of what the state of London would be in that debate. So I think, yeah, if we could come back to that, that would be good.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to suggest to you, Emma, that perhaps, because we were asked to provide our views, ideas or suggestions, you know, I have a different idea of how PQT could potentially work, that you could go away and look at all three of these things which are set out in law and how we could engage with this, have Assembly members more engaged as well as the public, and think differently about it. I think people often come along, they've got an area they're interested in, policing, transport, housing, that actually to talk to the mayor for a bit of that, but also a group of Assembly members, deputy mayors, whoever, could be far more interesting and informative. And certainly when I first came here, the State of London debate was a big conference. It was inclusive, and London councils were involved as well. So we might want to just think about that. So perhaps you could take that away. I can see members all sides waving. Who was first? Assembly member Desai, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And at the risk of repeating, but can I just agree with what you just said? I think there should be a role for the full Assembly. The GLA is the mayor and the Assembly. And as I understand from former experienced colleagues, the very first mayor of London actually did involve the Assembly. So I think that should be one of our recommendations. I would very strongly push that.
Okay, I think you can hear us loud and clear there, Emma. We would like these events looked at and how the Assembly can be fully engaged and involved in these, rather than just being this is the format we've always done. And I think PQT personally needs a little refresh as well. So perhaps you could look at that. So members were asked to note the proposals for this State of London debate on the 28th of June, contained in the report, and I think Emma's heard some suggestions and views and things we'd like to be looked at. And perhaps, Emma, you could come back to us whether it's at this meeting or whether it's through Bureau or groups, just to get some more input on how it could look in the future.
I'm very happy to do that. Just to confirm, though, my view is that to do a significant overhaul of that event for this year would be quite challenging, given the amount of...
Not saying for this year, saying going forward, could you look at it? I realise it can't happen for the June meeting, but start looking at it, because I think, as we've heard this morning, it takes a lot to plan. If we're looking at the one for next year, the PQT in the autumn and so on, you could look at that.
Yes, absolutely. I just wanted to clarify that that was correct. Thank you.
So, okay, members happy with that? Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much. Our work programme is item 8. Can we note that work programme? Thank you. And we all need to add on to that, bringing back the counting for the election, please. Date of next meeting is the 1st of February at 10 o'clock. And any other business urgent? There's no other business. Thank you very much indeed, members.